The toast was supposed to be about gratitude until my mother-in-law raised her crystal flute and called me Barren in front of 23 relatives. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply reached into my leather tote, pulled out a cream envelope, and placed it on the pristine linen tablecloth. Then I pressed play on my phone. The sound of a heartbeat strong, steady, alive filled the dining room. By the time Lorraine's manicured fingers reached for her pearls, the ultrasound photos were already spread across the table like winning cards, and the power in the Hayes family had shifted forever. My name is Evelyn Marlowe Hayes, though everyone calls me Evie, everyone except my mother-in-law, who insists on using my full name like she's perpetually disappointed in me. At 33, I've built a decent life as a product manager at Northbridge Payments, a fintech startup in Philadelphia. But sitting at the Hayes family Thanksgiving table in their Willow Ridge farmhouse, I might as well be invisible. The dining room smelled of sage stuffing and brown butter, the kind of perfect autumn scents that should make you feel warm and welcomed. Instead, I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach as I watched Lorraine Hayes orchestrate the meal like a conductor before her symphony. Sterling silver clinked against heirloom china the set she'd told me 4 times belonged to Carter's great-grandmother, as if reminding me I'd never truly belonged to their lineage. Carter sat beside me, his thumb absently stroking my wrist under the table, his only acknowledgement of my tension. My husband, bless him, was decent and kind, but confrontation with his mother turned him into a silent statue. In the living room, I could hear the low hum of the football game, where the uncles had retreated with their bourbon, leaving the women to navigate Lorraine's battlefield disguised as hospitality. The oak table stretched before us like a glossy runway, candlelight bouncing off the antique mirror behind Lorraine's head, creating a halo effect that would have been ironic if it weren't so perfectly staged. She'd seated me, as always, closer to the children's end, a detail that hadn't escaped my notice over 7 years of marriage. Paige, my sister-in-law, sat at Lorraine's right hand, amplifying every subtle dig with her practiced sighs and knowing looks. I shifted in my chair, feeling the weight of the cream envelope in my leather tote beside me. 2 more waited in my coat pocket in the foyer insurance policies I'd learned to carry after years of being ambushed by Lorraine's concerns and prayers for my empty womb. The miscarriage last summer, the one only Carter and I knew about, had been the breaking point. Not the loss itself that grief was mine to carry, but the way Lorraine had chosen that exact weekend to email me an article about finding purpose without motherhood. "Evelyn, would you pass the cranberry sauce?" Aunt Margaret asked, her voice cutting through my thoughts. She was one of the few relatives who looked at me with genuine warmth, though she'd never stand up to Lorraine directly. I reached for the crystal bowl, noting how my hands remained steady despite the electricity I felt building in the room. 3 months of therapy had prepared me for tonight. 3 months of documenting every cutting remark, every public humiliation disguised as concern. My phone, tucked discreetly beside my thigh, held recordings I'd never thought I'd need to make. The conversation flowed around me talk of Paige's twins' latest achievements, Cousin Bradley's promotion, the new wing Lorraine was funding at the country club, success stories and legacy building, each anecdote another brick in the wall that separated the fruitful from the barren. That word. She'd been dancing around it for years, but I knew, with the certainty of prey sensing a predator, that tonight she would finally say it. I touched Carter's sleeve, our prearranged signal that things were about to escalate. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he squeezed my hand once. He'd promised to have my back tonight, though we both knew his courage would need a push. The turkey had been carved, the wine poured generously, and the room had reached that golden hour of family dinners where guards drop just enough for truth to slip through. Lorraine stood, her burgundy dress impeccable, her silver hair catching the light as she raised her glass. "Before we continue," she began, her voice carrying that practiced authority of someone who'd never been challenged in her own home, "I'd like to propose a toast." The room quieted, forks settling onto plates, eyes turning toward the matriarch. I kept my breathing even, my expression neutral. In my tote, the envelope seemed to pulse with possibility. This was it. After years of absorbing her poison with grace, of being written out of my own life story, I was about to flip the script. The ultrasound images 12 weeks along, dated, with my name clearly visible, lay waiting. The legal letter from Howell and Ames LLP, professionally devastating in its precision, documented every single insult with dates and witnesses. The third envelope, the one Carter had signed and had notarized just yesterday, would redefine every future family gathering. I didn't come here to make peace. I came here to make terms. Lorraine's crystal flute caught the light as she began to speak about gratitude, about family trees and branches that endure. I waited, patient as a hunter, for her to walk into the trap she'd been building for herself all these years. The first time Lorraine suggested I was less than a complete woman. We'd been married 6 months. She'd cornered me in her kitchen during Sunday dinner prep, pressing a church bulletin into my hands with an article circled, "When God's plan doesn't include children." I'd laughed it off then, thinking she was just an overeager grandmother-to-be. How naive I'd been. By year 2, the suggestions had evolved into a campaign. She'd reorganized the family photo wall, placing Carter's and my wedding portrait noticeably lower than Paige's family shots, to leave room for baby photos. She'd explained with that razor blade smile. The Christmas card list somehow always forgot to include my name. Group texts about family planning mysteriously excluded me, though I'd hear about them secondhand from Carter. The summer barbecue 3 years ago still burned in my memory. Lorraine had gathered all the ladies for mimosas on the patio, then launched into a toast about the blessing of grandchildren. "Of course," she'd added, looking directly at me. "Some people have empty nests before there's even a nest to speak of." The laughter had been uncomfortable but present. I'd excused myself to the bathroom and vomited orange juice in shame. Carter knew. He always knew. But his response was eternally the same. "That's just how Mom is. She doesn't mean anything by it." Except she did. Every seating arrangement that placed me with the teenagers, every introduction where she'd mention Paige's twins but describe me as Carter's wife who works in computers or something, every prayer request she'd submit to her church group about those struggling with barrenness, always anonymous, but with enough details that her entire congregation knew exactly who needed their pity. The miscarriage happened in July, 8 weeks along. We'd been cautiously optimistic. Carter had actually stood up to his mother when she'd called to criticize our absence from the 4th of July party. "We're dealing with something private," he'd said. 2 days later, I was bleeding in the bathroom of Ridgeview Reproductive Center while a silent sonographer turned the screen away from me. That same weekend, while I lay in bed, hollow and grieving, Lorraine's email arrived. Thought this might help. The subject line read, "Attached was an article about successful childless women who'd found fulfillment through charity work." At the bottom, she'd added, "Some things just aren't meant to be. Perhaps it's time to accept God's plan with grace." I snapped. Not visibly, not dramatically, but something fundamental shifted in me that day. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing July 9th, 2:43 p.m., email from L. H., suggesting I accept childlessness while actively miscarrying. The documentation grew. Every slight recorded, every witness noted. The Thanksgiving text where she'd asked everyone except me to contribute to the family cookbook, since it's for mothers to pass down. The Easter brunch where she'd announced in front of 40 guests that she was converting Carter's childhood room into a craft space, since it's clear it won't be needed for grandchildren visits. HR at Northbridge had actually been helpful when I'd asked about hostile work environment policies. "Document everything," my manager had said. Dates, times, witnesses. Build your case. She'd thought I was dealing with a colleague. I didn't correct her. Carter and I started therapy in September. Dr. Melissa Brennan, our counselor, had been blunt. "Your mother is emotionally abusing your wife. Carter, your silence is complicity." That session broke something loose in him. For the first time, he saw the pattern I'd been drowning in. The way his mother had systematically diminished me, erased me, reduced me to my apparently dysfunctional uterus. "Oh, we draw boundaries, or we lose each other." I'd told him in the parking lot afterward, "I won't survive another year of this." He'd pulled me close, whispered apologies into my hair. That night, we made the plan. The pregnancy test turned positive in October, a cruel cosmic joke or perfect timing, depending on your perspective. We told no one, not after last time, but I made appointments, got the ultrasounds, kept every piece of paper, evidence. I thought, ammunition. The legal consultation had been Carter's idea. "If we're going nuclear, let's do it right," he'd said. The lawyer had been fascinated by our documentation. "This is actually textbook harassment," she'd said. "The pattern of behavior, the witnesses, the emotional distress. You have grounds for a restraining order if you want one." We didn't want that. We wanted something more surgical, more precise. The letter she drafted was a masterpiece of legal intimidation wrapped in professional courtesy. It named specific incidents, quoted exact words, listed witnesses. It outlined consequences. Cease all discussion of Evelyn's fertility. Cease all harassment disguised as concern. Or face formal legal action including potential restraining orders and civil suits for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The family trust documents were simpler but more devastating. Carter was a co-trustee. He had rights Lorraine had forgotten about in her assumption of his eternal compliance. The access agreements we'd drawn up where bulletproof future family gatherings were conditional on written acknowledgement of behavioral boundaries. Any violation meant immediate revocation of access to us and any future children, every Thursday for the past month. I'd practiced in the mirror. Not what I'd say I'd decided to let the documents speak, but how I'd move, how I'd breathe, how I'd place each envelope with the deliberate grace of someone who'd already won. Because I had. The moment I'd stopped trying to earn Lorraine's approval, stopped believing I needed it, stopped letting her define my worth by my reproductive capacity I'd already won, the rest was just paperwork. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 o'clock as Lorraine tapped her sterling silver knife against her crystal flute. The sound rang through the dining room like a bell calling the faithful to worship. "Family," she began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth that never quite reached her eyes when they landed on me. "Every year, we gather here to give thanks for our blessings, for the branches of our family tree that continue to grow and flourish." Paige smiled, pulling her twins closer. Cousin Rebecca placed a hand on her pregnant belly. The room hummed with the satisfaction of the fruitful. "The Hayes family has always been about legacy," Lorraine continued, her burgundy lips curved in what others might mistake for maternal pride. "From generation to generation, we pass down not just our traditions, but our blood, our features, our stories through the children who carry our name forward." The oven timer pinged softly in the kitchen. No one moved to check it. "This year, I'm especially grateful for the new growth on our family tree." She gestured toward Rebecca. "Another Hayes baby coming in spring. And of course, Paige's beautiful twins who remind us daily what blessings children are." I felt Carter's hand find mine under the table, his grip tightening. The signal we'd agreed on, he could feel it coming too. But tonight, Lorraine's voice shifted, taking on that false compassion I'd learned to recognize as the precursor to a strike. "I want us to remember that not every branch bears fruit, and that's acceptable." The word hung in the air. Acceptable. As if my existence needed her permission. Some branches remain bare by choice, others by circumstance, and some. Her eyes found mine across the table, holding them with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged in her own domain. "Some are simply barren." There it was. The room seemed to contract around that word. Someone gasped Aunt Margaret. "Maybe." A cousin laughed nervously. Paige took a sip of wine to hide her smirk. "We must remember to embrace all members of our family," Lorraine continued, her voice syrupy with false kindness. even those who can't contribute to our legacy in the traditional way. The barren branches need our love too, perhaps even more so, since they'll have nothing else to. Mom! Carter's voice cut through her performance, sharp and unexpected. Everyone turned to look at him, the perpetual peacekeeper, finally showing spine. But Lorraine wasn't finished. She raised her hand, dismissing her son's interruption with the gesture of someone swatting away a fly. Now, Carter, let me finish. This is important. Evelyn needs to hear that we accept her limitation, that she's still family, despite her condition. The barren are mentioned in Scripture, after all. God has a plan, even for the fruitless. Fruitless. She'd actually said fruitless. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Lorraine, perhaps. What I'm saying? She pressed on, her voice rising slightly, the way it did when she sensed resistance, is that we should be thankful for all our family members, those who give us grandchildren, and those who don't, can't, won't. Each word was a deliberate bullet. Evelyn, dear, I want you to know that despite your barren womb, you're still welcome at this table. The silence that followed was complete. Even the football game in the next room seemed to have paused. 23 faces turned between Lorraine and me, waiting to see if I would finally break. Some with sympathy, others with the hungry anticipation of those who feed on family drama. I didn't break. Instead, I breathed in slowly, counting to 4, held it for 4, released it for 4, just as Dr. Brennan had taught me. Then I reached for my tote bag. That's a beautiful toast, Lorraine, I said, my voice steady and clear. Since we're discussing family legacy and gratitude, I have something to share as well. My fingers found the cream envelope, its edges crisp and perfect. I'd chosen the expensive paper deliberately, the kind Lorraine used for her charity invitations, the kind that suggested importance, permanence, consequence. I stood up slowly, deliberately, the way I'd practiced, every movement controlled, graceful. The dining room light caught my wedding ring as I placed the envelope precisely in the center of the lace table runner, equidistant between the autumn centerpiece and Lorraine's place setting. Since we're toasting to barren branches, I said, letting each word fall like a stone into still water, perhaps everyone should know exactly what we're discussing. Lorraine's fingers tightened on her crystal flute. The soft pink of her manicure stood out against her whitening knuckles. Evelyn, what are you— Please, I interrupted, my hand raised in a mirror of her earlier gesture. Let me finish. This is important. I pulled out my phone, already cued to the audio file. My finger hovered over the play button as I looked directly at my mother-in-law. You called me Barren, Lorraine, in front of your entire family. On Thanksgiving, I let that sink in for a moment. So let's discuss what barren really means. The cream envelope sat between us like a loaded gun, and everyone at the table knew something had fundamentally shifted. The power Lorraine had wielded so carelessly for years suddenly felt fragile, brittle, like a branch about to snap. The preparation had been meticulous, like assembling a legal brief or a military operation. Every piece chosen for maximum impact, every word calculated for precision. 3 weeks ago, at 12 weeks and 2 days pregnant, I'd gone to my appointment at Ridgeview Reproductive Center alone. Carter had wanted to come, but I needed to do this part myself. The technician, a young woman named Amy with kind eyes, had printed extra copies when I'd asked. First baby, she'd asked, watching me carefully tuck each image into a protective sleeve. Yes, I'd said, and these pictures are going to change everything. The images were perfect clear profile, visible heartbeat, my name and the date prominently displayed in the corner, undeniable proof of life inside my supposedly barren body. 2 weeks ago, I'd sat in the law offices of Howell and Ames LLP, watching Catherine Howell craft what she called a velvet hammer. The letter was a masterpiece of legal writing, polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. Every incident documented with dates and witnesses. The summer barbecue humiliation, June 15th, 3:20 p.m. 11 witnesses, including Margaret Hayes and Robert Hayes. The email about accepting childlessness, July 9th, 2:43 p.m. Forwarded to my lawyer with full headers intact. The Thanksgiving planning text explicitly excluding me from the family cookbook, November 3rd, 6:17 p.m. Screenshot preserved. "We're not threatening to sue," Catherine had explained. "We're demonstrating that we could. There's a difference. One is aggressive, the other is protective." The cease and desist letter outlined specific behaviors that must stop immediately any discussion of Evelyn's fertility or reproductive capacity, any public or private statements regarding her ability to have children, any exclusion from family activities based on parental status. It cited relevant statutes about harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It noted that continued behavior would result in formal legal action, including but not limited to restraining orders and civil suits. "This isn't really about money or even legal action," I'd told Catherine. "It's about proof. Proof that I'm not crazy, that this really happened, that I have recourse." She'd smiled. "The best legal weapons are often the ones you never have to fully deploy." 1 week ago, Carter and I had met with James Morrison, our financial advisor, and Mark Brenning, a family trust attorney. The Hayes family trust was complex, but Carter's position as co-trustee gave him more power than his mother realized. The documents we drew up were surgically precise access agreements that redefined the terms of family participation. "Think of it as a behavioral contract," Mark had explained. "Violation of terms results in immediate consequences." The contract was simple but comprehensive. Any family member who wished to maintain contact with Carter and Evelyn Hayes must acknowledge in writing that they will not discuss, reference, or allude to fertility, pregnancy, or childbearing unless explicitly invited to do so by Evelyn herself. Any violation would result in immediate no-contact orders. Any announcement about pregnancies or children would be made solely by Carter and Evelyn on their timeline. No social media posts, no church prayer requests, no casual gossip. Violation meant exclusion from all child-related events indefinitely. "It's harsh," Carter had said, reading through it. "It's necessary," I'd replied. The night before Thanksgiving, Carter had signed everything in front of a notary. His hands had been steady, his jaw set. 7 years, he'd said. 7 years I let her hurt you. It ends tomorrow. I'd also prepared something beyond the legal documents, the audio file. 9 seconds of our baby's heartbeat, recorded on my phone during the ultrasound. The sound was clear, strong, unmistakable. A rhythm that meant life, hope, future. Everything Lorraine had said I couldn't provide. The final preparation had been physical. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a cream cashmere sweater that matched the envelope, dark slacks, my grandmother's pearl earrings, subtle makeup, nothing that could be criticized as trying too hard. I'd practiced my movements in the mirror, the way I'd extract each document, the precise placement on the table. No trembling hands, no rushed movements, every gesture deliberate and controlled. I'd even scripted key phrases, though I knew I might deviate, since we're discussing legacy. Here's our contribution to the Hayes family tree. These are our terms. Short, clear, impossible to misinterpret. The backup envelopes in my coat were insurance. If Lorraine tried to destroy the first set and I wouldn't put it past her, I had copies. If she claimed she never received them, I had witnesses. 23 witnesses, actually. But the masterstroke, the detail I was most proud of, was the timing. Thanksgiving dinner, her favorite holiday, her annual performance of maternal perfection, the day she invited everyone who mattered to her, all the people whose opinions she valued, her church friends, her country club companions, her extended family. She'd created her own perfect audience for her humiliation. In my bag, I also carried a small recorder, already running, legal in Pennsylvania one-party consent state, every word being captured, including her calling me Barren, including whatever came next. Evidence on top of evidence. "You ready for this?" Carter had asked this morning as we'd loaded the car. "I've been ready for 3 months," I'd told him. Maybe 3 years. Now, standing in Lorraine's dining room with that cream envelope between us like a battleground, I felt the weight of all that preparation distilled into this single moment. Every humiliation I'd documented, every legal consultation, every therapy session where I'd rebuilt my spine vertebra by vertebra, it all led here. The room waited. Lorraine's face had gone from pink to pale, her fingers still wrapped around her crystal flute like it might protect her from whatever was coming. I slid my finger across my phone screen, the gesture as smooth and practiced as everything else I was about to do. "Let me show you," I said, my voice carrying perfectly in the hushed room. "What a barren woman looks like." My fingers moved with practiced precision as I opened the cream envelope. The paper whispered against itself, the only sound in the crystallized silence of the dining room. "Since we're toasting legacies," I said, drawing out the first glossy black and white image. "Here's ours." I placed the ultrasound photo on the lace runner with deliberate care, adjusting it so it faced Lorraine directly. The image was perfect, a clear profile, the baby's head and body distinctly visible, my name printed clearly in the corner along with 12 weeks, 3 days. The room leaned in collectively. Paige's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Uncle Robert's fork hovered over his turkey. Even the cousins at the far end stretched their necks to see. I laid out the second image, then the third, arranging them in a fan pattern like playing cards. Each one showed a different angle, a different proof of life. The fourth image, my favorite, showed a tiny hand, fingers perfectly formed, raised as if waving. "Evelyn," Aunt Margaret breathed, her voice thick with emotion. Lorraine's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. Her carefully styled silver hair seemed to tremble slightly, or perhaps it was the candlelight playing tricks. I lifted my phone, my thumb finding the play button with easy familiarity. "And since we're discussing what makes a branch fruitful," the heartbeat filled the room strong, rapid, insistent. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. 158 beats per minute, the soundtrack of a thriving life. The sound seemed to bounce off the mirror behind Lorraine's head, amplifying through the space until it felt like the whole house had a pulse. Carter's hand covered mine on the table, warm and solid. His wedding ring caught the light as our fingers intertwined a united front. Finally, someone crossed themselves Cousin Michael, raised Catholic, probably saying a prayer of thanks or protection. I couldn't tell which. His wife, Sandra, had tears rolling down her cheeks. She'd had 3 miscarriages before their son was born. She understood what these images meant, what they cost. "Turn it off," Lorraine said, her voice barely above a whisper. I let it play for another 3 seconds, then touched the screen. The silence that followed was somehow louder than the heartbeat had been. 12 weeks, I said, my voice steady and clear. Past the first trimester, healthy, strong, due in May, just in time for Mother's Day. Ironic, don't you think? Lorraine's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, calculation, something that might have been regret but quickly hardened into something uglier. Her fingers finally released the crystal flute, setting it down with excessive care. "Why didn't you tell?" Paige started. "Because?" I interrupted, my gaze never leaving Lorraine's face. "We wanted to be sure. After the miscarriage in July, yes. Lorraine, the weekend you sent me that article about accepting childlessness, we decided to wait, to gather proof, to make absolutely certain that no one could doubt or diminish this pregnancy." Gasps rippled around the table. The miscarriage revelation landed like a second blow. Several relatives turned to look at Lorraine with new understanding, perhaps remembering her prayer requests about family members struggling with barrenness from last summer. "You knew," Aunt Margaret's voice carried a note of accusation as she stared at Lorraine. You knew she was losing a baby, and you sent— I didn't know, Lorraine said quickly, but her voice lacked its usual authority. No, I agreed. You didn't know. You never asked. You just assumed. Barren. You called me. Fruitless. A branch that doesn't contribute to the family legacy. I stood up fully, my hand still linked with Carter's, and looked around the table at each face. Everyone here heard it. Everyone here witnessed it. On Thanksgiving, in her own home. Lorraine Hayes called me Barren while I'm carrying her grandchild. Now wait, Lorraine started to rise from her chair. I'm not finished, I said, and something in my voice made her sink back down. You wanted to toast family legacies. Let's talk about the legacy you've created. 7 years of humiliation. 7 years of being seated at the children's table, excluded from family planning discussions, erased from photographs and introductions. 7 years of prayer requests for the barren woman in your family. I picked up one of the ultrasound images, holding it up to the light so everyone could see the baby's profile clearly. This child will be born into a family where their grandmother publicly humiliated their mother for being unable to conceive. Is that the legacy you want to pass down? Evie, Carter said, squeezing my hand. His voice was gentle but firm, my cue that it was time for the next phase. I nodded and carefully gathered the ultrasound images, stacking them neatly. But I left one deliberately on the table in front of my place setting, the one with the tiny waving hand, turned so it faced Lorraine directly. These pictures aren't for you, I told her. They're evidence. Proof that your cruelty was directed at a pregnant woman. Proof that your assumptions were wrong. Proof that the barren branch you wanted to prune from your family tree is actually bearing fruit. Rebecca, 8 months pregnant herself, pushed back from the table slightly. Lorraine, how could you— The room's allegiance was shifting, tilting away from the matriarch like a boat listing to one side. Even Paige looked uncomfortable, her usual smirk replaced with something uncertain. This is manipulation, Lorraine said, trying to regain control. You planned this. You ambushed me in my own home. Yes, I said simply. I did. The admission seemed to shock her more than anything else. She'd expected denials, justifications, apologies, not this calm acknowledgement of strategic revenge. I reached into my tote again, withdrawing the second envelope. This one was crisp white, with the law firm's embossed letterhead visible through the high-quality paper. The weight of it felt substantial in my hands, the weight of documentation, of proof, of consequences. This, I said, placing it beside the ultrasound images with the same deliberate care, is from my attorney. Lorraine's face went from pale to ashen. Your attorney, Catherine Howell of Howell and Ames. I opened the envelope, unfolding the letter with slow precision. The legal letterhead gleamed under the dining room lights. Would you like me to read it to the room, or would you prefer to read it yourself? Her hand twitched toward the letter, then pulled back. This is ridiculous. You can't sue me for harassment, for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I looked down at the letter, finding the relevant passage. June 15th, 3:20 p.m. Hayes Family Barbecue, 11 witnesses present. Quote, some people have empty nests before there's even a nest to speak of. Would you like me to continue? Uncle Robert shifted in his chair. Ooh, Lorraine, what is she talking about? I cleared my throat and read directly from the letter, my voice steady and clear. July 9th, 2:43 p.m. Email sent to Evelyn Hayes while she was actively experiencing a miscarriage, suggesting she accept childlessness with grace. Documentation includes full email headers and IP address verification. Several people gasped. Margaret covered her mouth with her hand. November 3rd, 6:17 p.m. I continued. Group text message explicitly excluding Evelyn Hayes from the family cookbook project, stating it was for mothers to pass down. Screenshot preserved with metadata intact. Enough, Lorraine said, her voice cracking slightly. There are 14 more incidents documented here, I said, running my finger down the page, each with dates, times, and witnesses. The pattern of behavior is what lawyers call persistent and pervasive. Did you know that Massachusetts recognizes causes of action for family member harassment? Carter stood up beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. Mom, this isn't a threat, it's a boundary. The letter outlines very clearly what needs to stop. You're behind this, Lorraine turned on her son, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. You went to a lawyer against your own mother. No, Carter said firmly. I went to a lawyer to protect my wife, the wife you called Barren in front of our entire family while she's carrying your grandchild. I lifted the letter, reading the key paragraph. Cease and desist all discussion of Evelyn Hayes's fertility, reproductive capacity, or parental status. Cease and desist all harassment, whether direct or indirect, including but not limited to public humiliation, exclusion from family activities, and unsolicited commentary on personal medical matters. Paige found her voice. You can't legally force us not to talk about, actually, I interrupted. It's called a harassment prevention order. This letter is the courtesy warning. The next step involves a judge. I set the letter down, angling it so others could see the legal language, the impressive letterhead, the gravity of formal documentation. Every single incident is backed up. Emails, texts, recordings. Yes, recordings. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state. Lorraine's hand went to her throat, fingers finding her pearl necklace like a talisman. You've been recording me. I've been protecting myself, I corrected. There's a difference. This is insane, she said, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. I'm your family. Family doesn't call family, Barren, Aunt Margaret said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She was usually so quiet, so accommodating. I've watched this for years, Lorraine. We all have, and we said nothing. We're all complicit. Thank you, Margaret, I said, feeling something loosen in my chest. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. This letter isn't about punishment, it's about protection. What it says is simple. Stop discussing my fertility, stop the harassment, or face legal consequences. That's all. And if I don't agree, Lorraine's chin lifted, a last grasp at defiance. Then we proceed with filing, I said simply. The evidence is overwhelming. Our lawyer is confident. And every single humiliating moment you've orchestrated becomes part of public record. Your church friends will read about the grandmother who tortured her daughter-in-law for being barren. Your country club will whisper about the lawsuit. The Hayes family legacy will include a harassment order. The threat of public shame, Lorraine's greatest fear, landed exactly as intended. Her face cycled through emotions, rage, fear, calculation. You wouldn't dare, she said, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. I wouldn't have, I admitted. 6 months ago, a year ago, even 2 months ago, I wouldn't have. I would have absorbed it, internalized it, believed I somehow deserved it. But carrying this child while documenting your cruelty, it changed something. I won't let my child grow up watching their grandmother treat their mother as less than human. Carter's hand found my shoulder. We're united on this. Mom. Completely united. The letter lay between us on the table, its legal language a new kind of scripture in Lorraine's carefully controlled domain. Several relatives were now reading it, heads bent together, whispers rippling through the room. My God, Lorraine, someone said, Cousin Jeffrey, the quiet accountant. 14 documented incidents. What were you thinking? She didn't answer. For perhaps the first time in my 7 years of knowing her, Lorraine Hayes had nothing to say. I reached for the third envelope pearl gray, heavier than the others. This was the one Carter had struggled with most, the one that had required 3 drafts and a lengthy discussion with the trust attorney, the one that would fundamentally restructure the power dynamics of the Hayes family. This, I said, placing it with surgical precision next to the legal letter. Concerns future family participation. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. Future family participation. Carter. I turned to my husband. This one's yours to explain. He straightened, and I saw him become the man he'd been in our therapy sessions, clear-eyed, determined, finally awake to years of enabling abuse through his silence. As co-trustee of the Hayes Family Trust, Carter began, his voice formal, I have certain rights regarding family gatherings held on trust properties and family events funded by trust resources. Lorraine's lawyer mind kicked in immediately. You wouldn't dare touch the trust. I don't need to touch it, Carter replied. I just need to enforce it. The trust documents, which you had me sign 5 years ago, give co-trustees equal authority over family unity and welfare decisions. He picked up the gray envelope, withdrawing the documents we'd paid $800 to have drafted and notarized. These are the new participation agreements for all Hayes family gatherings. Participation agreements. Paige laughed, but it sounded forced. For Thanksgiving. For everything, Carter said. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, anniversaries, any gathering where Evie and I are expected to attend. Anyone who wants us there signs this first. He unfolded the document, holding it up. It's simple. 3 rules. 1. No discussion of Evelyn's fertility, pregnancy, or parenting unless she initiates the topic. 2. No social media posts, church prayer requests, or public announcements about our children without our explicit written permission. 3. Any violation results in immediate departure and no contact until after our child is born. Children, I corrected softly. Plural. We're planning more than one. The correction landed like another small bomb. Lorraine flinched visibly. This is preposterous, she said. You can't make people sign contracts to attend family dinners. Actually, Uncle Robert said slowly, they can, if Carter's a co-trustee and these gatherings use trust resources. He trailed off, his own legal background filling in the blanks. I pulled out my phone, showing the screen to the room. I've already created the digital version. Signature link. Anyone who wants to maintain a relationship with us and our children clicks the link, reads the terms, signs electronically. It takes 30 seconds. And if we refuse, Paige asked, then you're refusing. I said simply, that's your choice, but you don't get access to us or our children. No baby pictures, no first birthday parties, no Christmas mornings. You can explain to your twins why they never meet their cousin. The leverage was brutal but necessary. Paige's children adored Carter. The thought of explaining their uncle's absence, the cousin they'd never know, I could see her calculating the cost. The trust provision is particularly interesting, Carter continued. Any family member who refuses to sign forfeits their standing in trust-related decisions. That includes the education funds for grandchildren, the vacation property allocations, you're blackmailing us. Lorraine said. No. Carter replied. Blackmail would be threatening to expose something unless you comply. We're not threatening anything. We're stating our boundaries and the consequences for crossing them. You taught me about consequences. Mom, every action has them. I picked up the document, reading the key paragraph, Acknowledgement of Boundaries. The undersigned agrees to respect the personal and medical privacy of Evelyn and Carter Hayes. This includes, but is not limited to, refraining from commentary on fertility, pregnancy, or parenting choices. The undersigned acknowledges that violation of these boundaries will result in immediate cessation of contact until terms are renegotiated. It's legally binding, Carter added. Our lawyer made sure of that, and it's been filed with the trust documentation. Official record. When did you become so cruel? Lorraine asked Carter, and for the first time tonight, she sounded genuinely wounded. When you called my pregnant wife Barren, he replied without hesitation. When you made her cry in bathroom stalls at family gatherings. When you sent her articles about accepting childlessness while she was miscarrying our first baby. That's when. The room was silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. 8:13 p.m. We'd been at this for exactly 16 minutes, And 7 years of power dynamics had been completely inverted. "There's one more element," I said, pulling out a single sheet from the gray envelope. "The announcement clause." Lorraine looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past 5 minutes. "What announcement clause?" "You love announcements," I said. "Church newsletters, country club bulletins, Facebook posts. So here's how announcements about our pregnancy and any future pregnancies will work. We control the narrative, completely. Any announcement made without our permission results in immediate no contact through the entire pregnancy and the child's first year." "A year," Paige gasped. "A year," I confirmed. "You announce our pregnancy without permission. You don't meet the baby until their first birthday. Non-negotiable." I looked directly at Lorraine. "You've spent 7 years controlling my narrative, telling everyone I was barren, broken, less than. That ends now. Our story, our timeline, our terms." Margaret was the first to speak. "Where do I sign?" Everyone turned to look at her. I said, "Where do I sign?" She pulled out her phone. "Send me the link. Evie, I should have stood up for you years ago. This is the least I can do now." "Aunt Margaret," Paige started. "Oh, shut up. Paige," Margaret said, and several people actually laughed nervous. Surprised laughter, but laughter nonetheless. "We all know this has been wrong. We've watched Lorraine grind Evie down for years." "Well," Evie ground back. "Good for her." My phone buzzed. Margaret had already signed. Lorraine's hand reached for the documents, her movements sharp and desperate. Carter pulled them back, keeping them just out of her grasp. "These are copies," he said. "The originals are filed with our attorney and the trust office. You'll get the digital versions after dinner." "I was joking," Lorraine said, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "It was just everyone knows I didn't mean barren," I said quietly. "You meant it. You planned it. You stood up, tapped your glass, and called me barren at Thanksgiving dinner while I'm carrying your grandchild." The ultrasound image still lay on the table, the tiny hand seeming to wave at the woman who'd tried to erase its mother from existence. "Apologize," someone said. It was Jeffrey again, the quiet accountant who'd barely spoken at family gatherings in the decade I'd known him. "For God's sake, Lorraine, just apologize." She turned to him, then to me, her mouth opening and closing. But nothing came out. 7 years of practiced cruelty had left her without the vocabulary for remorse. "I need air," she finally managed, standing abruptly. Her chair scraped against the hardwood floor, an ugly sound that seemed to break whatever spell had held the room frozen. "Sit down, Mom," Carter said, and his voice held an authority I'd never heard before. "We're not done." She sat, slowly, like her bones had turned to glass. I stood fully, gathering the ultrasound photos back into their envelope with deliberate care, leaving just the one on the table. "You called me barren in front of your family. These are our terms for remaining a family." My phone buzzed again. Then again. I looked down. Robert had signed. Then Sandra. Michael. 3 more signatures appeared as I watched. "We'll be at the North Maple Inn tonight," Carter announced, standing beside me. "If anyone wants to have a real conversation about moving forward, you can find us there. If you want to sign the agreements, Evie has the link. If you don't..." He shrugged. "That's your choice. But choices have consequences." He picked up my coat from the sideboard where it had been laid earlier, holding it for me a gesture of partnership, of protection. I slipped my arms into the sleeves, feeling the weight of the 2 backup envelopes still in the pockets. Insurance I hadn't needed. "Wait," Paige said suddenly. "You're leaving before pie." "There's nothing left to say," I replied, picking up my tote. "Your mother called me barren. I showed her she was wrong. The documents are self-explanatory. The boundaries are non-negotiable." I looked around the table one last time, memorizing the scene, the candlelight still flickering, the food growing cold, the crystal still gleaming. But the power dynamics had fundamentally shifted. Lorraine sat diminished in her throne-like chair, while I stood tall, leaving on my own terms. "Evie," Margaret called out. Congratulations on the baby. Truly. Thank you, I said, and meant it. As we walked toward the door, I heard chairs pushing back, voices rising in argument, Paige defending her mother, Jeffrey telling them both to grow up, someone Rebecca, maybe saying something about karma. Carter's hand found mine as we reached the entrance. Behind us, the grandfather clock chimed 8:30 p. We'd destroyed 7 years of tyranny in less than half an hour. The baby, Lorraine's voice called out, desperate and thin. When are you due? What is it, a boy, or... I turned back one final time. Sign the agreement, Lorraine, then maybe we'll talk. The November air hit my face like a benediction as we stepped outside. Sharp, clean, free. The gravel crunched under our feet as we walked to the car, neither of us speaking until we were inside. Doors closed, the farmhouse glowing behind us like something out of a movie we no longer had to watch. You were magnificent, Carter said, his voice full of wonder. We were magnificent, I corrected, placing his hand on my still flat stomach. All 3 of us. He started the car, and as we pulled away, my phone lit up with notification after notification, more signatures, text messages. Margaret had started a separate family group chat without Lorraine or Paige. The subject line read, "Supporting Evie and Carter." By the time we reached the main road, 15 of the 23 family members had signed the agreement. By morning, it would be 19. Paige would hold out for 3 days before her husband made her sign. Lorraine would take 2 weeks, multiple drafted apology letters, and 1 session with her own therapist before she finally, grudgingly, put her name on the document that acknowledged my humanity. But that night, driving away from the Hayes family farmhouse with Carter's hand in mine and our baby safe beneath my heart, I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that I'd walked into that house as the family scapegoat and walked out as the woman who'd brought Lorraine Hayes to her knees with nothing but the truth, some good lawyers, and perfect timing. The ultrasound photo I'd left on the table, the one with the waving hand, would sit there through the night, through the arguments and the cleanup, through Lorraine's tears and Paige's rage. A tiny hand waving goodbye to the old order, hello to the new. I'd been called Barren at Thanksgiving. By Christmas, everyone would know better. By the time our daughter was born in May, yes, a girl. Though we didn't know it yet, the Hayes family would be completely restructured around respect, boundaries, and the hard-won understanding that some branches, when pushed to breaking, don't snap. They snap back. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts. Your experiences and perspectives make this community special. Until next time.